السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Alhamdulillah wahda wa salatu wa salamu ala man la nabiya ba'da. Amma ba'd. Welcome to another podcast with our Shaykh, our mentor, Shaykh Hatem al-Hajj. And we had already had a past one about a very sensitive topic. Today we will continue inshallah ta'ala with other sensitive topics that are inshallah of practical value to the Muslim community. So welcome Shaykh to our second podcast. Today inshallah we wanted to talk a little bit about the issue of the application of fiqh in modern times and the fact that sometimes what we find as the ideal position is not one that is the most conducive to the time frame we live in, and that raises a whole host of questions. The issue of gradualism, the issue of pragmatism, the issue of understanding classical fiqh in modern times, to what level there's allowed, to what level there isn't allowed. So today we're going to be talking about a number of topics that overall deal with the internal leeway that the Sharia provides and where that leeway crosses the red line in terms of fine-tuning the ahkam of our fiqh. So with this overall introduction, Shaykh, can you summarize for us certain principles that every single student of knowledge should be aware of when it comes to understanding ahkam and, you know, the famous principle تغير الفتوى بتغير الزمان and all of these types of maxims and al-urf muhakkam. Can you help us for whatever, you have in mind to summarize the most essential qawaid and maxims that the student of knowledge should be aware of?
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. First, jazakumullah khair, Shaykh Yasir, for the invitation. And then, as you said, there are certain principles that are immutable principles, Islamic principles that are immutable, they are unchanging. The beauty of Islam and the genius of the Sharia of Islam is that we have constant objectives, we have overarching maxims that do not change, and we have a very flexible legal framework. When we say flexible legal framework, people should not misunderstand this to mean that we can basically play around with our detailed rulings whenever we want by tashahi or by passions and desires and biases. This is not true. So Imam Shatibi has a statement that is very accurate, very precise, and very thoughtful about the divine address not being subject to change. He says that had the Sharia, had it been meant for this world to be eternal, the Sharia would never need to be changed. We would never need a new divine address to humanity. It's done. Khitab al-Ilahi is done, has been fulfilled by the Sharia of Islam. And if this world was meant to be eternal, or were meant to be eternal, which it is not, the Sharia will be relevant and applicable for eternity. And he says when customs change, and new rulings are applied to new customs, this is not a change in the divine address itself. However, it is basically those customs falling under different principles of the Sharia that continue to be fixed. So imagine three layers: the highest objectives of the Sharia, the overarching maxims and principles of the Sharia, and then the flexible legal framework. The Sharia, the objectives are stable, they are fixed, they're up here, the principles are here, and those are basically the legal maxims, the manatat of al-ahkam, the effective cause of al-ahkam, and so on. Those are fixed. And then underneath, there is the changing customs, the changing circumstances, changing realities. And those changing realities, when they move, when they change, they fall under different principles. The principles are fixed, the reality is changing, they would fall under different principles. There has been, and there will continue to be, if we were to keep the relevance and the practicality of the Sharia, then we will have to recognize that there has always been a dialectic between the law and the reality. And this dialectic was recognized by the scholars. The erudite, verifying scholars have always recognized this and have always been ready to adapt to new realities and to adjust al-ahkam to new realities. If you remember in our previous discussion about the Khilafah, we talked about how the scholars, out of their interest in and desire for peace and order, they were flexible enough to accept sort of different forms of conferring legitimacy on imams, whether it's through ahd or passing on the covenant or even forceful seizure of power in the interest of peace and order. You could say that this is like a manifestation of their pragmatism or their basically adaptation to different realities of their times. So we need to make sure at the end of the day that only qualified scholars will be entrusted with this very important work of tajdeed, or the renewal and revival of the Sharia. And the Prophet ﷺ used the word tajdeed. إن الله يبعث لهذه الأمة على رأس كل 100 عام من يجدد لها دينها. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will commission, send to this ummah, at the beginning of every century or at the turn of every century, he who will, or they who will, many people say it is they, not he, they who will renew its deen for it, renew. He used renewal. He did not use restoration. He used renewal. And many people want to say that it is only about restoration. It is only about bringing the people back to the way things were during the time of the Prophet ﷺ and the companions, radiallahu anhum. And of course it is mainly about this. It's mostly about this. It's mostly about the fact that the ummah can drift away from the Islamic ideals and needs to be reminded of the Islamic ideals. But it is also about ijtihadi renewal. It's also about adjusting to new realities and adapting to new realities, not simply restoration, because restoration would be suitable for basically restoring a fixed structure, like a static fixed structure, like a building, to its old glory. But Islam is a lot more dynamic than this.
So, Sheikh, all of this is fine theoretically. As you know, the devil is in the details, right?
Of course.
And as you're aware, there's a constant pushback and internal struggle and dialogue going on between ulama and du'at, between movements. As you're aware, you have the hardcore traditionalists, and then you have, the both of us are coming from the tajdeedi, wasati, revival paradigm, exemplified by Rashid Ridha and others, of trying to rethink through. And then you have, of course, modernists and progressives who really don't seem to care about the Sharia. So you have this entire spectrum. So again, the question is, in your mind, what is the red line? Like, up to what level? When would it be considered that you are actually rejecting the Sharia or trying to do that which is not allowed to do?
Okay, so when you try to change things that are not meant to be changed ever, there are certain things, there are aqa'id, the creeds that are not meant to be changed. There are the morality, the principles of morality in Islam. These are not meant to be changed. There are al-hudud wal-muqaddarat. There are the sort of the fixed instructions of the Sharia and quantifiable instructions of the Sharia that are not meant to be changed. There are mostly in the area of ibadat. The ibadat are never meant to be changed. So there will not come a time where fasting in Ramadan will start from Dhuhr and end at Asr or Maghrib. These things are never meant to be changed, but there is plenty of room for a change in certain areas, in international relations, in financial transactions, in some adaptability even in family rules or family laws. That's less amenable to change, closer to ibadat than it is to muamalat, but there should still be some room for adaptation to new realities in the world. There
So
would
who gets to decide, Sheikh?
the qualified scholars, the mujtahideen, and that's why we have
Okay, so there
ijtihad.
will be an internal disagreement at times.
Certainly, most
And so
certainly.
those outside of that circle should understand where qualified scholars disagree and where they are unanimous in this regard, right?
Yeah,
Because
of
one of the
course.
problems we have is again the quickness with which any type of discussion of the type that you're doing is automatically disqualified because there's a knee-jerk reaction to any type of fine-tuning that the Sharia actually allows. So I'm going to now do a deep dive and do specific topics. And again, for the record, this is not scripted. You know, we're just, I have questions and ideas in mind, but you know, this is something coming organically, inshallah ta'ala. So I want to hear the Sheikh's view, and obviously I have my views and we can discuss them back and forth. But let's begin with one of the most constantly discussed issues over and over again, and that is the hudud and apostasy laws. What do you expect a modern Muslim nation state, a modern Muslim country that, suppose a political party, because theoretically, I don't want to mention a specific country's name, suppose a Muslim majority country, an Islamist party comes to power, right? And now they have taken over, alhamdulillah, a massive group of Muslims, the majority of whom are not religious people 5 times a day praying, the majority of whom are involved in sins like drinking and whatnot. And now this party has come to power and they decide to fine tune and not apply the Sharia instantaneously. Because according to their view, I mean, again, let's look at Egypt when the Arab Spring happened. As you know, the quick modifications that the Islamist party had to do, like, is there going to be jizya? Well, okay, I guess not. There's not going to be jizya. Okay, how about a non-Muslim, power? Oh, they can have power except for the president. What do you mean he can't be there? So as you know, the whole conversation took place. Is that kufr? The gradualism that these parties adopted, can they make a temporary change for the sake of a greater good? Or must they apply instantaneously? Or is there actual leeway for rethinking through, for example, apostasy and the punishment for apostasy? Some thoughts about these types of things. And I have my views, but let's hear yours.
Okay, so yeah, the first thing that we have to agree on, and I think Muslims, practicing Muslims all agree on, is the perfection of the Sharia and the ultimate wisdom of our Lord and mercy of our Lord. And whatever it is that He had legislated for us is infinitely wise. As Imam Ibn Qayyim said, الشريعة مبناها على مصالح العباد في المعاش والمعاد والعاجل والآجل وهي رحمة كلها وعدل كلها وحكمة كلها. So Sharia is based on the benefit and the well-being, welfare of people in this life and the one to come, and sort of immediate and long-term. And he says it's all about mercy, it's all about justice, it is all about wisdom. Anything that departs from this is not part of the Sharia, even if it was interpolated into it. So we have to accept the Sharia in its entirety. The Prophet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said ادخلوا في السلم كافة, which basically embrace Islam in its entirety. All of you embrace Islam, or it could mean also embrace Islam in its entirety. So we are embracing Islam in its entirety. كل من عند ربنا, everything that comes from our Lord is good for us. But then again, at the same time, I don't think that even the most strict, I shouldn't say that, but I think that even the more strict, there are people outside of the scholarly community, and we're not talking about the people, the extremists outside of the scholarly community, but within the scholarly community, even the stricter scholars would recognize the need for gradualism. Even the stricter scholars would recognize that Umar suspended the had for sariqa during Am al-Majaa, or during the famine. And they would recognize how Umar changed certain things because of the changes in socio-political realities. The diya that used to be ala al-aqila, that used to be, or the blood money that used to be the responsibility of al-aqila, which is the paternal kin. Omar changed it because of the changes in the socio-political realities of their times. People moved around, and by the time you collected the diya from al-aqila, it would have taken months or years, and it would have been unfair to the family of the victim. But Omar changed it to Ahl al-Diwan, the people that are registered in the same, or the people in the same registry, same town, same naqaba or syndicate, same this, same that. And that is basically a precursor of like insurance companies, like.
Interesting.
Even the strictest scholars or the stricter scholars would recognize adaptability and would ridicule. Of course, the Hanafis and Malikis accepted Omar's position on the issue of al-aqila, not the Shafi'is and Hanbalis. So there is still disagreement, and there is still like a dialogue between the scholars and this dialectic between the law and the reality. But gradualism is basically just, it's untenable to think that you could impose all of these things all of a sudden on people without sort of gradual steps towards the realization.
So gradualism would not be considered kufr.
Oh, of course not. Like, of course not.
So to be very specific then.
But also the hudud, in all honesty, the hype about the hudud, there are, people disagree how many hudud are there.
3, 4, 5.
Yeah. So let's say 4 hudud that are fixed penalties. Like, why is akl mal al-yatim, or devouring the wealth of the orphan,
less important? Exactly.
Not a haddable.
Haddable is a new one. Okay.
Yeah, I use those things.
Okay.
But why there is no had for akl mal al-yatim? That's mubiqat, for riba. So if you examine the hudud punishments, there is always this huge force that is pushing you or pulling you, and Allah wants to deter you. This is not meant for revenge. It's meant for deterrence. And the evidentiary standards that were applied by the scholars throughout the ages indicate that this is about deterrence. It is not about revenge. It is about deterrence and purification, but mainly deterrence. So you have like the zina, great harm can ensue from this, family breakdown, societal breakdown, and then the pull, is enormous. That lust has enormous power. So there has to be a high wall to deter people from this crime that will cause this much harm, to protect people's honor. The same applies to qadhf, to protect people's honor. And then the push is also great because it's usually done in a state of extreme anger. You have, al-qatl, but that is qisas, not hudud specifically, but qisas, which is also severe punishment, equal retribution to protect people's life. You have, the theft, for instance, to protect people's property, and then the drive for it is huge as well. So let us understand that we're talking about 4 or 5 punishments out of thousands that are
immoral
left, are left for discretionary punishment, ta'zir, and out of thousands more where no punishment at all is prescribed, or like no penalties are prescribed whatsoever or encouraged whatsoever. So we have to basically think of the hudud in light of this and understand that gradualism is an essential, basically, part of the application of Sharia. Gradualism is an essential part of the application.
Must there be, so let's firstly give an example, again hypothetical. So,
and you talked about apostasy, right?
We'll get back to that. Before we start that one. Hypothetical example. a majority Muslim land has had an Islamist party. They win the party, they win it, they're now in parliament, or at least they can maneuver. But the country has allowed zina, has allowed khamr, has allowed so much fawahish. The Islamist party tactically wants to get to a position where more and more Islamic laws can be applied, but they can't do it overnight. So they say that, okay, let us start, let's just say, taxing khamr, let's just say. So that we want to de-incentive, or de-incentive. I want to make it, more difficult for them to acquire. They cannot shut it down immediately, let's just say. Critics are going to say, this is kufr. They have not applied the Sharia. And even if they're trying to de-incentivize, the fact of the matter is, it's still allowed. And their laws are not banning and prohibiting. The counter-argument from their side is that, yeah, but we have a group of drunkards. We have a whole society that's immersed in this sin. They're not going to go from 0 to 100 immediately. So as one simple example, again, hijab, for example, right? As you are aware, those countries that have tried to enforce it, generally speaking, has been a harsh backlash, and those countries that are organically attempting to bring about morality have actually seen massive success rates in this regard. So comments and thoughts on this type of these examples.
Well, the taxing khamr, for instance, this is what our khulafa did, from the Rashidun, but not levying taxes on Muslims, but non-Muslims. So non-Muslims in walluhum bay'ah. Umar radiallahu anhu said, walluhum bay'ah, let them sell it, and then you take basically your taxes from them. You take your taxes from them. So non-Muslims in a Muslim country will not be forced to shun khamr. They're allowed to sell khamr among themselves.
And to produce it, and manufacture it, and yeah.
Well, if you're there, will sell it, they will produce it, and then they collected taxes from them, and this is not Abdul Malik ibn Marwan. This is Umar ibn al-Khattab.
But that was for the Ahl Dhimma.
That's for Ahl Dhimma, yes. So the idea that you will never find khamr in a Muslim country and it would never be allowed, would be completely eliminated, has not been real or true,
Since
even the time of
Yep.
Umar ibn Khattab.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
So let's be clear on this. The second thing is, now, if Muslims, like if we can do this with non-Muslims, we want to sort of bring Muslims into the fold of Islam gradually, and if taxing khamr will be a step towards the complete prohibition of khamr enforced by the government, complete sort of enforcement of prohibition by the government. Prohibition of khamr can never be sort of debated among Muslims. Khamr is prohibited. You are a sinner if you drink. You are a sinner if you sell, buy, produce, etc. Certainly, there is this agreement outside of the Muslim lands and so on in terms of selling. But the idea here is, we're not talking about the ruling of khamr here. We're talking about a Muslim government who comes and in all honesty, I believe that Islam should be kept away from partisan politics. Islam can never be apoliticized, or can never, you can never remove politics from Islam, or Islam from politics, Islam from influencing the public space. But I don't think that Islam should be exploited or used for partisan politics. But if a group of well-meaning Muslims or like a well-meaning party that is Islamically oriented, that is informed in their policies and their strategies and their priorities and their objectives by their Islamic values and their commitment, their religious commitment, come into power and decide that they will try to take gradual steps towards the complete prohibition of khamr for Muslims, then I would not fault them, let alone call them Kufar.
So again, Sheikh, as you're aware, no scholar is of that nature. But unfortunately, we have to deal with so many, especially in the West. They don't understand the gradualism or siyasat al-shara, and they assume that, we have to implement Sharia instantaneously overnight. And this is something that we have spoken about multiple times. Let me give you another example.
You remember Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, Abdul Malik ibn Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, and what he said to Umar ibn Abdul Aziz? Like, he blamed him for,
yes,
for his timidity to
Yes.
enforce all the.
Always the youngsters want to have that immedialism. Yeah.
Who's being blamed here?
Umar ibn Abdul Aziz.
Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. It's like that. So Umar ibn Abdul Aziz told him, if I do it all at once, they will rebel all at once.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Like, aren't you happy if no day passes except that your father will be yuhyi sunnah yumit bid'ah?
Yeah, it's getting better bit by bit. Yes, exactly.
I think that this is the difference between Abdul Malik ibn Umar ibn Abdul Aziz and Umar ibn Abdul Aziz.
Theoretical, youngster, idealistic,
Yeah.
seasoned politician, wise, experienced. This is the difference between the two. Yeah.
Pious,
Pious as well. Yes.
much more pious, much
Yes.
more knowledgeable.
Yes, this is the standard class, Sheikh, so we have to always deal with it. So, Sheikh, one of the issues that we constantly get asked, and I get asked this in public by non-Muslims in particular, and I've given my responses in this regard, the issue of apostasy and blasphemy. And my position has been, no doubt the Sharia has the ideal laws, and nobody has the right to permanently change the laws of the Sharia. Given the nation states we live in, given that the world has changed and we are no longer under a khilafah, just like in a nation state we cannot implement the jizya, even though ideally there is just this notion of jizya. So given the modern world we live in, that if somebody changes one's faith in a Muslim majority land, it's up to them. If they're able to implement, alhamdulillah, and that is ideal. Nobody's going to deny that. But if in case an Islamic party is not able to implement Allah's ideal ruling in that particular situation, this is not in and of itself a rejection of the Sharia, as long as they don't ascribe it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As long as they understand that given the modern dynamics we live in, that this is not something that is possible for us to do without repercussions that are worse than the positives we think will be achieved, right? So that has been my position, that is something that a modern nation state, because they're not a khilafah and because they're not applying, they cannot apply all the Sharia anyway. So what are your thoughts on this of apostasy laws and blasphemy laws?
I would even take it a step further and say that apostasy, you know that I'm Hanbali. In our madhab, it is not a had, it is not a fixed penalty. It's a discretionary punishment, a discretionary punishment that was legislated. I have written a paper on this. It's online. If you put in my name and apostasy, you will find my detailed position on this issue. I don't think that it will be possible for us to deny that this ruling had existed, that this punishment has been executed by the khulafa. It is controversial whether it was ever implemented during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. There are controversial reports about this. I'm aware of them, but it is unclear whether the Prophet ﷺ ever implemented this punishment. There are some reports where it's clear that he had not implemented it. People who apostatized in his face, who were left, and this punishment was not exacted against them. And that is part of the reason why in Hanbali fiqh, this is considered as a discretionary punishment, because had can never be suspended once, it reaches the court, and the Prophet ﷺ was the court at those times. It has to be basically sort of applied. But since the Prophet ﷺ waived it at certain times, then it makes perfect sense that this is a discretionary punishment. It existed. This is the position of the four Imams, particularly with Muslim men. Imam Abu Hanifa has a different position about Muslim women, which also indicates the legal justification, the sort of ratio allegiance behind this law. That why is he differentiating between men and women? Because traditionally, people who apostatized or went back into kufr, they joined the Kufar. They joined Quraysh. They started to fight against Muslims. But they estimated that women would not be doing this, would not be fighting. Anyway, the discussion on apostasy and the different positions that different scholars, particularly contemporary scholars, have taken with regard to apostasy is a very lengthy discussion. But in my viewpoint, this is a discretionary punishment that does exist. It existed in our history. But being a discretionary punishment, it can be suspended for a greater benefit. It can be suspended for a greater
This is
benefit.
even more radical than what I have argued for.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're saying, Aslan, in your view, it's not a had.
It's not a had, it's a discretionary punishment. And in this case, being a discretionary punishment, it is within the jurisdiction of the Muslim authority to suspend it. It is within the power and the authority of the Imam or the Muslim government to suspend it for a greater benefit. And the obvious greater benefit here is reciprocation.
Yes,
I mean,
yeah.
keep the doors open. You know, ظهور حجة وبرهان وظهور سيف وسنان. As an Imam Ibn Hazm said, to prevail, there are two ways to this. By hujjah and burhan, by proofs and, evidences, or sayf and sinan, or by spears and swords. Islam will sometimes prevail in both respects, but will always prevail in one respect, which is ظهور الحجة والبرهان. So it would make perfect sense to keep the doors open, allow people to walk in and out, and basically, what are you seeing? What are you seeing in the world today when people are allowed to walk in and out? Are you seeing people basically walking out more or walking in more? And which kind of people are walking out and which kind of people are walking in? Like, look at it impartially. But please look at the people who are converting to Islam. Look at how sincere they are. Look at how thoughtful they are. Look at their trajectory also after conversion. They become scholars. They become great da'is. They have complete commitment to Islam. And look at the people who leave Islam and their trajectory post-apostasy. So should we keep the door open? Is it does it bring about a greater benefit for the Muslim community? Of course, someone will say that during the colonial times, like in Algeria, for instance, during French occupation, and that is what Shaykh Hatem rahimahullah said, that had we not had that punishment of apostasy, the community would have been destroyed, because you have a lot of pressure, under pressure to leave Islam. You're being colonized. You're subject to non-Muslim tyrannical rule. And in this case, had there not been mechanisms for the religious community to defend its integrity and to defend its identity and sort of faith, there would have been a great loss.
But in our time, Sheikh,
so in our times, it's different.
Exactly.
It's different.
When you apply such pressure, we have seen in multiple lands, when you apply this coercive pressure, in reality, the people rebel internally. And there is actually a detrimental effect on their iman. And that's why people actually have overthrown governments that they felt were too strict on them, or even in the case of one land, don't like mentioning names, but the minute, the ruling party or the king relaxed, we see the reality of the people. And all of that strictness was just completely shallow, to the point of one wonders what level of iman they had. So to be clear, therefore, and because, as you know, I get especially a lot of pushback in this regard, to rethink through the modern applications of these laws, not only is it not a rejection of the Shariah, it actually might be the wiser course of action for a person who wants to apply the Shariah in the long term.
Yeah, of course. It would bring about great benefit for the community and for the faith, for the deen and for the ummah. If we have, realistic, gradual, pragmatist, and I do repeat, I use this word, and I understand that it has a bad reputation within our community, but I am basically trying to underscore the positive connotations of this word, pragmatist
So, what if somebody were to
approach.
say, Sheikh, that this is reforming Islam?
No, it's not. Umar ibn Khattab did not change Islam when he changed the al-aqila for,
Excellent. جيد.
when he suspended when he did not basically divide the conquered lands between between the conquerors or between the armies. So this is not changing Islam. This is basically applying the Islamic principles to different realities and adapting to circumstantial variables.
Excellent. So again, this is the key point, dear viewers, is to understand there's no reformation going on. The only reforming we're calling for is your understanding of what we're saying. Islam doesn't need reformation. Rather, it is the fine tuning that the Sharia allows, right? There's no, Protestant revolution going on. We're protesting the shallow understanding of Islam that some people have. In reality, this is the wisdom that Allah Azza wa Jal has allowed within the Sharia, the fine tuning and the gradualism that overall brings about a better sense of iman and a closeness to the sharia. Now, we talked about apostasy, we talked about blasphemy. Obviously, there's multiple issues. One thing we have to talk about, Sheikh, is really sensitive, but it needs to be done. Marriage and gender. One of the most sensitive topics of our times. And we have strong feelings from the side of many of our sisters, from the side of many of our brothers. We have the rise of radical feminism. We have the rise of the red pill and, alpha masculinity. It's just a whole bunch of stuff going on here. So let's try to have some, inshallah, deconstruction of this sensitive topic. Do you believe that Islam has come with specific gender roles?
No, of course, yes, it has come with specific gender roles, and no one can argue about this. But like I said, your understanding may not be necessarily what Islam is about. There is a spectrum of different interpretations that you have to be aware of the spectrum. That is the sa'a, that is knowing the disagreement between the scholars. It will give you this broadness of your horizons and your approach to things. So you have to know what Islam says. And when Islam says more than one thing, that is basically we have different interpretations, and no one can say mine is Islam. There are matters of agreement between the scholars, and then we can comfortably say this is what Islam says. But oftentimes there are disagreements, and in this case, you can't say this is what Islam says. When we had this discussion, the Supreme Court talked about abortion. You should not be saying this is what Islam says. Islam says so many things about
Yes.
abortion. So when you say that my interpretation is Islam, I think that this is just self-deluded, self-conceited, too arrogant.
So, before we get to the specific issues, can you give us? I know you have an entire book, by the way. He has an entire book, Sheikh Hatem has an entire book on gender roles and gender interactions, right? Yeah. So, can you summarize in just a few minutes some of the main points that you believe Islam has come with, that we can definitively, categorically state that of the roles of a man in Islam and of the roles of a woman in Islam? So, in a nutshell.
Okay, so one of the things that Islam clearly, basically prescribes here is that there will be some degree of responsibility and authority for the man within the household.
The
So
qiwama.
الرجال قوامون على النساء بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض وبما أنفقوا من أموالهم. That's the verse 34 in Surah An-Nisa. So men have qiwama, and here is the problem that we fall in sometimes when I would like to be a Muslim apologist. I understand apologetics a little bit differently. Apologetics or being a Muslim apologist is not about apologizing on behalf of Allah No, it's the word comes from defense. To put like a systematic defense, or to put together a systematic defense for your deen or your particular doctrines, or the apologia, it comes from the apologia, and how Socrates basically it was Plato calling the Socrates' defense of himself in the court apologia. So this is where it comes from. It is to defend your deen. It is not to apologize on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah does not need anyone to apologize on his behalf. Of course not. But anyway, what Islamic Muslim apologists often do is that sometimes when they are not guided, when they are not grounded in Islamic knowledge, and where they're trying to be a little too hasty to conform to circumstantial variables, they can do like sort of detrimental patchwork, where they can try to sort of patch different value systems in a way that results in inequity, injustice eventually. So if you say, for instance, that الرجال قوامون على النساء, قوامة is not about authority whatsoever. It is simply about responsibility. Whoever said that responsibility and authority can be divorced from each other? Like, whoever said that someone can basically have obligations put on them without corresponding rights? Whoever said that you could be the president of a country and have responsibilities only and have no rights? What sense there is no sense in that whatsoever. So then we have to have basically a moderate, truly moderate understanding of what that concept is about, that qiwama is about. Is responsibility and authority at the same time. Al-kharaj bid-daman. It's, profit basically is linked to liability. It's always like this. الغنم بالغرم. These concepts go hand in hand. So now the qiwama, we have to agree that it means both responsibility and authority. But now, for instance, some people think that there is a particular arrangement that is called Islamic for the household. For instance, can women have careers? Well, nowadays, the problem is many people think that all the changes in the reality are caused by basically the trickle-down effect of philosophy and thought and stuff like this, and you can push back by counter philosophies, counter thoughts. No, that's not true. Technological advancements have caused a lot more changes. So the changes in our reality owe more to Newton than they owe to Voltaire. They owe more to technological advancement.
That's a nice way to phrase it. I'm going to quote that, Sheikh, if you don't mind.
Yeah, they owe more to technological advancement than they
to intellectual thinkers.
And science affected philosophy in the last 200
and
years
roles,
more than philosophy affected science. So things, the Industrial Revolution, slavery
could only have been banned after the Industrial
colonialism, slavery. There are so many things that changed in our reality, not because of intellectuals or the trickle down of philosophy, or because of real, tangible changes
in how we do things.
Reality, in people's reality. So now, in the past, and that's a problem that our Muslim women also need to understand, that it was not the tyranny of men that kept them from realizing their potential. It was just not doable. Like, nowadays women have close to the earning potential of men, right? Not exactly there, but very close. Many women have like a higher earning potential. In many fields, they have equal earning potential or even higher earning potential. But generally speaking, they're not quite there. So the CEOs of the Fortune 500 companies are mainly men, The wealthiest 100 people are mostly men, etc., etc. So they're not there yet, and they may never be there. But in the past, it it was not like basically like a conspiracy, like a made conspiracy against them to deprive them of earning potential. What were the jobs that were available? Blacksmithing, fighting, you know.
Generally, for them, it was nurses and teaching.
Yeah.
That was in most of them. Yeah.
So there were many professions that they were not basically suitable for. They were not suitable for. They were not going to be like, and fighting was not basically like nowadays, like you press a button and you drop a bomb. No, it was like it required a lot of physical strength. So now you have the women who think that there was like a male conspiracy and it's time for them to rebel. And you have the men who don't recognize that things have changed. And women now have like the earning potential that men have. So nowadays, like, here's what happens within the Muslim family. So they like two working people get married, and Islam does not prohibit women from working. You know the hadith of Khalat Jabir when she went out basically during her period.
Yeah.
She went out to tend to her orchard.
Yeah.
And she was told to go back home, and then she went to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, خروجي لعلك أن وجثي نخلك لعلك أن تصدقي أو تفعلي خيرا. Go out, tend to your orchard, maybe you will be able to give charity or to take care of yourself. So Islam does not, and Asma used to carry the fodder for Zubair's horse and for 3 miles back and forth and so on. So Islam did not prevent women from working outside, but Islam wanted two things, and it's clear, for them to prioritize their family and for them to work within environments conducive to their values. Modesty is a signature characteristic of Islam. So Islam wanted these women to observe these two things: prioritize their family and work in environments that are conducive to maintaining their Islamic values. Having said that, if you have two family physicians get married, for instance, and they bring in the same income, and then because we've been trying to tell women that Islam basically gives you everything, modernity gives you and more. So we're trying to say to them, his money is his and your money is yours only. Okay, so she expects that he will be spending and she will be saving her income. And she may even go as far as expecting that he would be spending and splitting his savings, and she could save all of her income. And then she expects that he would also, basically, since she goes out to work, that he would also be flexible, because she'll come back tired and she will not be able to make dinner. So he should be flexible enough to make his own dinner and stuff like this. And he should pay for childcare and all of that. What nonsense is this? Like, how could this be considered equitable in any way? And then at the same time, you will have the man who expects that he could be married to his wife and she could stay home, be a homemaker, and give up her career, give up advancing her career, be a homemaker. And after 30 years, he can just divorce her and
give the mahar for 30 years ago.
Yes, he can divorce her and give her the deferred dowry, which, sometimes there is deferred part of the dowry, sometimes there is not. But he just can divorce her and give her a nafaqah for her, like during her waiting period, and give her, not necessarily mut'ah because it's controversial between the madhahib. That's it, so she goes out. Okay, so now the problem is her niece would never want to repeat that story. Her niece would never want, her daughter will never want to repeat that story. and to be a homemaker and to prioritize her family. What is the difference between now and 500 years back? Now they have the same earning potential or close to the same earning potential as men. She would be seeing her like friend, like from high school, who now has a career, who is independent financially, and comparing herself to her. So now we have to figure out how to adapt to these new realities and how to adapt to these new realities without changing, compromise, like without devastating our value system. So there has, men and women have to complement each other still. They basically, they can't be sort of equal in all regards, because it wouldn't make sense, because or there cannot be similarity in their roles in all regards, because how do we complement each other if you're not different? You need to be different, have different roles, so that you complement each other. So we will have to be mindful of this. We will have to be mindful of the qawama of the man, to want him to be qawam, to want him to be responsible. You have to give him some authority to demand, to ask of him to be responsible for his family.
But that doesn't have to be the same type of qiyamah that was practiced 100 years ago.
It has to be re-envisioned. It has to be basically reconceptualized. But he has to still be the head of the household. He still has the right to obedience. But here's what it is. Obedience happens in different circles. And Shaykh Hatem has a very great, he was like a mufti in Egypt. He has a great book on the Muslim family, where he says that obedience, that there are different circles for obedience. There is one at the center of obedience, that is basically obedience when it comes to the marital relationship. There is obedience that basically pertains to marital life in general. And then there is a wider circle of obedience, which is obedience unless he asks for, like basically obedience, period, unless he asks for something that is non-sensible, non-purposeful, non-halal, not ma'ruf. Ma'ruf does not only mean halal, but it also means sensible. So if he asks for something that's non-sensible, non-purposeful, or non-halal, then there is no obedience. But at least you have to preserve the right to obedience when it comes to marital life. Marital life, that circle. And at the very least, when it comes to the marital relationship.
Yeah.
And then, certainly there are certain hadith that talk about, asking for her permission to go out and to, not bringing in people into his home without his permission. Even that can be nuanced and can have different interpretations. Is that because it is his house, he owns it, or it is because he's the husband? So Imam Nawawi seems to think that it is because he owns that house. So what if she co-owns it?
Oh my
What
gosh,
if she pays
you're
rent?
going to get into a lot of trouble for this. It's like,
No, but I'm just saying that, so there are different circles, and then it is unlikely that you would expect people to observe, or you expect women to observe the largest of those circles. They would be recommended.
So, Sheikh, I have a different way of explaining, which is ending in the same result, and that is when Allah says in the Quran, الرجال قوامون على النساء. This is the general rule. Rijal are qiwam. There is a level of authority. There's no question about this, right? Then Allah gives two ilal. بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض وبما أنفقوا من أموالهم. And the first of them signifies the physical in particular. If you look at the books of tafsir, it is the fact that the man is hunting, the man is protecting, the man is at war. So the man is physically protective. And so obviously, because he's physically more qualified, Allah has given him qiwama. And number two, وَبِمَا أَنفَقُوا
There
مِنْ
are also intellectual differences between the way women think and the way men
which
think.
are
and
more conducive for leadership. Yes.
Prioritize
Yes, agreed.
their yes.
And the second one is وَبِمَا أَنفَقُوا مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ, which is financial. Now, the modern world we live in has chipped away and eroded the need for that physical prowess, and the economic disparity between the two genders. This is رغم أنوفنا, it is what it is. The modern world has taken away the need for that physical disparity. Now in the office, everybody's exactly the same. Intellectually, in terms of computer programming, whatever, it's really, men and women are really the same in this regard by and large. And the economic power that is now, given to both genders, it has also stripped away, once upon a time, the financial responsibilities and the financial preference the men had. So when both of the ilal have been chipped away, understandably, the result, which is qiwama, is also going to be chipped away. It's going to have to be rethought. It's not something we are happy about. It's not something we're embracing, but it is a reality we have to deal with. And here's my point. In and of itself, to rethink through the implications of qiwama is not against the shara, as long as qiwama is maintained, right? And so the nuances of what qiwama entails is cultural. Qiwama is shari. But the manifestation of qiwama will change from time to place. So the way that my grandfather and grandmother interacted together, in the 1800s in British India, whatever, is not binding on how myself and my wife, much less my daughter and her husband in the future, are going to have to interact. So this is the way I phrased it. Any disagreement with that phrasing?
I would just say that we have to maintain the qawama, and we also cannot basically restrict بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض to a set of qualities that we assume because of the qualities that Allah had favored them with. Allah had favored men with certain qualities. We cannot limit them to physical strength. This will continue to be there. It will stand. Yes, I agree with economic disparity that has been almost clearly eliminated or totally eliminated. But بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض will stay. So الرجال قوامون على النساء will stay, but again at the same time, because she is now contributing to the sort of financial stability of the family, then it will not be the same as it was 200 years ago. But we have to maintain the family structure. We have to maintain that structure. We have to maintain the husband as the head of the household because of the necessity of having a head for any functioning, successful institution. Ship, a plane, a company, a state. There has to be eventually some. If you will have constant fighting, constant negotiation over all things without decision making being granted to any party, then that's a prescription for destruction of the family and the subsequent destruction of the society. Men have to understand that things are different. They do have close to the same earning potential than men. And if you marry her and divorce her after 40 years and expect her to take her suitcase and walk out, and then expect her niece and daughter to want to repeat that story, you are deluded. So Islam will come in now and say, no, we will protect that woman. We will give her, this was part of the decisions of Amja in the Amja family code, which I really recommend for people to read Amja's family code because it is very traditional, very orthodox, but at the same time very cognizant of the changes in our reality when it comes to custody, when it comes to maintenance and things of that nature. So we will take the concept of mut'a, for instance, which is the bereavement gift, consolation gift, alimony, whatever it is that you want to translate it as. But you take that concept of mut'a and you take the scholarly position that mut'a is for all divorcees, not only for those who have not had like a designated, so mut'a in Islam, there is between the contract and bina, or the consummation of marriage, and after the consummation of marriage. Between the contract and the consummation of marriage, If she had a designated sadaq, she gets half the designated sadaq. If she doesn't have a designated sadaq, she gets the mut'ah. Everybody agrees on that mut'ah, except that Imam Malik, who considered it still to be recommended, not obligatory. But then after the consummation of marriage, they disagree whether divorcees will have a mut'ah or not, because they had their mahr. So some of the scholars said they're not entitled to mut'ah. But there is this position which is in agreement with the apparent meaning of the Quran. وَالْمُطَلَّقَاتِ مَتَاعٌ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ.
Yes, بالمعروف.
For the generalized, unqualified statement of the Quran that the mutallaqat will have a consolation gift.
بالمعروف, which will vary from time to place, according to
Ma'ruf,
culture.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So in this case, we can employ this and we can take the position of the scholars who say it's for all mutallaqat, and we can compensate this woman. And there would be a panel of scholars who would put in consideration the duration of marriage, his contribution to the marriage, and so on, and the cause behind the divorce.
So, in other words, to be very specific then, and like we're both in absolute agreement as usual, which is a bit terrifying all the time, mashallah, we're always coming. In other words, Shaykh, there is no astaghfirullah rejection of the Sharia. There is no changing of Allah's ahkam. If we say in modern times, for some couples, a type of alimony or a type of settlement that is done in which a divorced lady will get more than her mahar if she hasn't been working, and if the husband has no legitimate need to divorce her and now she has no other source of income, that it is permissible to Quranically, there's nothing change being done to actually allow for more than what perhaps our earlier scholars would have allowed for.
And if you think what our earlier scholars had allowed for, they say أدناها ثوب وأعلاها خادم.
Yes.
So the least is basically to give her a garment, and the highest is to give her a servant. Well, do you mean what a servant means?
Yeah, it's quite expensive.
Like if you actually give her enough to hire a servant for the rest of her life, that's quite expensive.
But again, Shaykh, what we have
anyway,
is,
but then this is a statement. This is a scholarly statement. But then we can adapt to our new realities, and we can figure out what is fair for this woman.
And so
what
again,
is fair to basically give her financial security for the rest of her life, and what would be fair so that her niece and her daughter will think, no, she was not wronged. She still had financial security. I could still dedicate myself to homemaking. I could still prioritize the family. I can sacrifice advancing my career for my family. So in order for a woman to entertain, and you're not talking about like a small group of women that would basically would not entertain all of this, or would not be concerned about financial security in the future, or would not be concerned about. No, you're talking about the masses. The Sharia is not for your small group that resides in your small echo chamber online on social media. The Sharia is meant for all the Muslims out there.
Jayyid. So what we have, Shaykh, and as usual, is knee-jerk reactions on both sides. You have those that are acquiescing to modern notions of feminism, in which they do believe these simplistic ideas that even if they're working, even if they're bringing money to the table, even if they have this notion that, okay, the man has all responsibility and I don't owe him anything, including qiwama, and everything that I earn is absolutely mine. And no marriage is going to function like this. Then you have on the flip side, some of our brothers who are wanting to find cultural values of a century ago and assuming that they are Islamic. And each one feeds into the stereotype of the other. What we are both arguing is that there is nothing wrong with taking our situation into account and understanding that it is natural and normal that qiwama will be rethought, even as we still affirm there is something called qiwama, and that financial obligations and financial responsibilities and marital or divorce situations can be changed in light of modern times. In fact, what we are arguing, and I think you're all on similar wavelength, we meaning the Fiqh Council and Amja, is that we should enforce an Islamic prenuptial agreement, where in a prenuptial agreement, we actually have percentages put in such that it becomes a shart for the nikah. Right? So this is one of the ways we can get out of it. So Shaykh, before we wrap up, inshallah, one other, again, sensitive issue, and that is gender interactions. And in particular, the notion of living in the West as we do. We have our sisters, going pretty much everywhere, dressed, inshallah. The point is they are dressed appropriately. We'll get to what if they're inappropriately dressed, meaning they're not fully wearing the hijab. That's what we mean by that in this particular circumstance. But then when it comes to our Islamic gatherings, our Islamic conferences, to what level of strictness are we required to apply? Must we bring about complete segregation in our Islamic gatherings? Because there's arguments both ways. As you're aware, and to summarize for our viewers, those that are on the stricter side have a legitimate argument like, hey, this is our space. Let us control to the max and let us have full segregation. And on the other side, you have I would say, some pragmatists who say, hey, look, many of our brothers and sisters, they're not to that level. And if we were to be ultra strict, they're not coming and listening to the lectures. And so we are not going to enforce that type of complete segregation. Rather, we have an understanding that, yeah, this is an Islamic culture and environment, nothing overtly haram taking place. So we're going to be a little bit on the laxer side. Fact of the matter is, the majority of conventions are, actually all mainstream conventions are on that side. So you have the critics who then come along and argue these aren't Islamic, because they're not enforcing, and there are non-hijabi sisters coming along. And the speakers, like myself and yourself, attend these conventions. And from our perspective, we feel that there's no question hijab is mandatory. We feel that there are bigger priorities at this stage because many of the people in the audience are not at a level where they're going to be embracing certain aspects of Islam. So we have this back and forth between those critics who accuse us and others of selling out or of watering down or of not enforcing, versus our understanding, and it could be wrong here, where we feel this is not the time and place when we have 10,000 Muslims, the majority of whom are not even praying 5 times a day, the majority of whom are all in major sin. This is not the time to nitpick something that is not on the top 5-10 of our list here. So a little bit of thoughts about this issue of segregation, especially when it comes to Islamic conventions and lectures.
Well, the book that you pointed out, you referred to, the book that I wrote on gender interaction, it's male-female interaction in Islam. I had a picture of like a classroom, like where men and women coexist in the same classroom. And I had the speaker, which was supposedly a man, facing the men, and the women were to the side a little bit. They are still able to see the speaker. There is no partition between them and the speaker, but they were a little bit to the side where the speaker is not facing the women all the time. I think that people would be entitled to critique, like a young male preacher or speaker sitting across from like a good appearing woman.
It's all relative, though, Sheikh. I'm going to push back
Yes.
here. It's all relative. It's all subjective. All these adjectives you're using.
But at the same time, these
Who's going to define these things?
recognizable things. Our scholars have always talked about these concepts. Forget about it. Not completely, not well dressed. Not forget about well appearing, because a young man sitting across from a young woman for 1.5 hours, I think it's a setup that's a little bit problematic. Like if you have a young man sitting here and a young woman sitting there, and they're basically face to face for 1.5 hours, and you're telling him lower your gaze, غض بصرك.
Wait, Sheikh, you say in just the two of them, or you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about even if it is like 200 people, but he's sitting right across from like a young woman that may not be properly dressed, and he's sitting across from her for like 2 hours, 1 hour, 45 minutes, half an hour. That is not conducive to lowering your gaze. Like, doesn't Allah say, قل المؤمنين يغضوا من أبصارهم? Say to the believing men to lower their gaze? Like, is this arrangement conducive to lowering your gaze? Well, what is the lowering your gaze about then? If we're not going to try to make arrangements for this to happen. So, like, you're 25 years old, she's 25 years old, you're sitting across from each other for like 45 minutes, and then supposedly you're lowering your gaze. Well, how is that happening?
So, Sheikh,
So I
that's
think that-
one example, which is, I think, definitely on the more extreme side.
Yeah,
Let's be more.
But okay,
Okay.
so in the drawing that I have in the book, I have the women to one side. There is no partition between the speaker and the women. Exactly like you had it yesterday at Epic. Didn't we have the seminar, the Zakah seminar yesterday at Epic? I was facing the men. The women were to
That's
the
how
side.
we do it at our masjid. Yeah.
The women were a little bit to the side. I think that if a woman was given that lecture, I would have placed her table across from the women.
That's exactly how we do it at our masjid,
And
by the way.
the men would be to the side, so that the arrangement is sensitive to our values and to the concept of lowering your gaze. And in that picture that I had in the book, I had a partition, and I wrote next to the partition an optional. I go to different places. Sometimes they have the partition.
Sometimes
I don't
not, yeah.
tell them remove it. Sometimes they don't. I don't tell them put it. At Masjid al-Wali, where I usually conduct my classes, we have that partition between men and women. But again, at the same time, there's no partition between me and the sisters. I am sitting here facing the men. The sisters are a little bit
Personally,
to the side.
Sheikh, I agree with you. This is the ideal, and that's what we do in our masjid. Personally, however, even this is too liberal for some people, and it is too strict for others, as you're aware.
But the Masjid of the Prophet ﷺ did not have a physical partition between men and women. Yes,
but
women were behind the men.
The argument given by the modern critics is that our modern women are not dressed appropriately all the time compared to the Sahabiyat. But Sheikh, let's get now to the more explicit question, and that is the conventions that are beyond our control. You're invited to these mainstream ones, so am I. And you're well aware that there is no segregation in 5,000 people, 10,000 people. There is not even a organic, i.e., yeah, sure, there are, certain women that just sit together, certain men, but overall in the audience,
I don't think that we're required to have physical segregation. I think that there should be basically self-motivated segregation, because the speakers and the Muslim preachers need to be teaching people about Islamic modesty and appropriate Islamic behavior, so that there will be self-enforced, not complete segregation, but self-enforced modesty, where the women would choose to sit next to women and the men would choose to sit next to men, and there would not be inappropriate interaction.
Sheikh, you're saying the preachers would teach this.
But this is the shortcoming.
My philosophy is
yes.
The preachers, of course, must teach this. And I could be wrong, but in these massive conventions, the priority at that point in time for these 5,000-10,000 people, we know who they are. They're the ones that don't come to the masjid regularly. They're the ones that, for the priority for them is not to be taught segregation at this stage. The priority for them is to make them feel izzah for the ummah. The priority for them is to feel a sense of khushu' and iman, to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to love their religion. There are people that are leaving the faith at these types of conventions. So my philosophy, these large mainstream conventions that I'm not in charge of, where I'm in charge of, we have the segregation. We don't bring up issues of segregation. We don't bring up issues of the hijab, not because I don't believe in them, but because I don't think this is the right time or place or forum to do that. These are the times where, as I said, we bring them a sense of izzah for their ummah and a sense of pride of being Muslim, right? Now, the critics allege that this is a watering down and a betrayal of the amana that is given unto us. And in response, I simply say, لِكُلِّ مَقَامٍ مَقَال. I have given multiple lectures in my masjid about hijab and about women's roles and issues and whatnot. And this is for those that are now more interested in these topics, right? So do you yourself, when you go to, and I know you go to these conventions, you yourself do not talk about segregation on those platforms. Not to put you on the spot, sorry.
I don't go to those conventions, but like I rarely go to those conventions. But I don't blame people who go to those conventions, and I don't basically decide for them what they believe to be the right discourse for at that time. I just have one reservation about people who use the priority card or the priorities card to never address those issues. Like someone who's an imam in a masjid, for instance, for 25 years, and he has never addressed those issues because it is not a priority. It's not
Fair
like
enough.
you have to like you have to help. We talked about Erdogan before in a previous discussion with you. So you have to say to yourself, it has been 20 years. I took this congregation from point A to point B, but you can't basically be stand still and say that it is not the right time. It's been 20 years. Like, what have you done? You need to be concerned about Islamic manners, Islamic etiquettes, Islamic way of life. You need to be
Agreed. Okay.
basically you need to consider those things. But when will you do it? How will you do it? Where these are questions. These are you will have to figure out the answers to those questions, and no one can dictate to a particular preacher when, how, and where to do these things. But they just need to be concerned, and they need to be doing something about it.
Yeah. Okay, so inshallah, let us summarize and wrap up, inshallah ta'ala. So we were talking about gradualism and pragmatism and the slow application of ahkam al-shara'. And khulasatul qawl in this regard is that there seems to be enough leeway and permissibility to have a long-term vision that is implemented in smaller steps. And this applies not only to Muslim majority lands, but also in situations like here in America, where we feel the da'wah does require many steps to get to the final goal. Any final comments you have about this issue of pragmatism and gradualism?
No, I believe that this is the case, and I believe that there should always be priorities. And I believe that people who are not praying, it may not be a priority to talk to them about Islamic etiquettes of mingling and to address their greater, like if you have cancer, you're probably not going to be that concerned about like a benign mole on your hand or something. So there certainly must be prioritization and prudent approach to al-amr bil ma'ruf and nahy anil munkar and to preaching and to da'wah in general is necessary, is vital for our success everywhere, in Muslim majority lands or wherever we are as Muslim minorities, but particularly so where there are Muslim minorities, because those Muslims should not be pushed away. Of course, they should be accommodated. They should be welcomed. They should not be pushed away, because it is very easy for them to get lost.
And when we do so, astaghfirullah, this is not a reformation of the religion whatsoever. And contrary to what many of the critics allege, this is simply applying the wisdom within the Shariah that is allowed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, demonstrated by our Salaf and our ulama throughout history. And when we learn and study, we understand this is what the Shariah itself allows us to do, inshallah. With this, Jazakumullah khair, Shaykh, for spending so much time. May Allah Azza wa Jalla bless. May Allah put it in Mizan Hasanat. And inshallah, we hope to have further conversations. Viewers, if you have specific topics you're interested in, more than happy to continue these conversations with our Shaykh. And inshallah, we will see you until next time. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
إن المسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات والقانتين والقانتات والصادقين والصادقات والصابرين والصابرات والخاشعين والخاشعات والمتصدقين والمتصدقات والصائمين والصائمات والحافظين فروجهم والحافظات والذاكرين الله كثيرا والذاكرات أعد الله لهم مغفرة وأجرا عظيما.